Most people believe danger announces itself, that it comes with noise, with chaos, with warning. But the truth is far worse. Most tragedies begin quietly. A short walk at night, a quick stop at an ATM, a familiar door opening, just like it always has. And then, nothing. No screams, no witnesses, just a life that vanishes, and a camera that records only part of the truth. Tonight, you'll hear real stories where ordinary moments became final moments, where killers didn't chase, didn't rush, they waited. These aren't legends. These aren't rumors. These are real cases. And every one of them leaves a question that still hasn't been answered. Turn off the lights, put your headphones on, and remember, the most terrifying thing is rarely what you see on camera. It's what the camera never shows. Now, let's begin the scary stories. Matthew Chase was just 22 years old when he vanished into the night streets of Los Angeles in the summer of 1988. Young, creative, and on the cusp of adulthood, Matt had no idea that a simple errand would become the last trace of his existence. On the evening of June 8th, Matt shared dinner with his close friend and roommate, Teresa Da. The two returned to their apartment shortly before midnight, around 11:45 p.m. It was quiet, ordinary, safe, or so it seemed. As Matt stepped inside, he noticed something that immediately caught his attention. His paycheck, still sitting untouched on the coffee table. He was nearly out of money, and the bank would take a full day to process the deposit. Impatient and practical, he decided to head to the ATM right away. The machine was only 2 blocks away. Still, Teresa felt uneasy. It was late. The streets were dark. Against Matt's initial protests, she insisted he take her red 1983 Volkswagen AG TI. Before he left, she made one last request: to grab some cat food from across the street on the way back. It should have been a 15-minute trip, but 15 minutes turned into 30, then 45, then an hour. Matt never came home. Teresa tried to convince herself he was just driving around, clearing his head. She eventually went to bed, hoping he'd be back by morning. He wasn't. When she woke up and found Matt's room untouched, his bed unslept in, his belongings still there, fear set in immediately. She woke her brother Steve, who also lived in the apartment, and together they called police. But officers refused to act. Matt had only been gone a few hours, they said. Adults disappear all the time. Come back tomorrow. Unwilling to wait, Teresa and Steve began their own investigation. Steve called the bank, pretending to be Matt, desperate for answers. What he learned was chilling. Throughout the night, multiple ATM withdrawal attempts had been made using Matt's card. Some unsuccessful, one requesting $280. That request made no sense. Matt's daily withdrawal limit was lower than $280. And worse, his account balance was under $100. He had gone out specifically to deposit that paycheck. To detectives, this detail screamed duress. When police were informed, the tone of the investigation changed immediately. At the time, most ATMs had no cameras, but one machine Matt's card access that night did. The footage was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable. There was Matt standing at the ATM, and directly behind him, far too close, was another man. Close enough to see his PIN, close enough to whisper threats, close enough to control him. Investigators believe Matt intentionally requested impossible withdrawal amounts. A silent distress signal, a desperate attempt to alert someone that he was in danger. Composite sketches were made from the footage. Flyers were distributed. Tips poured in. None led anywhere. A day and a half later, Matt's paycheck finally cleared. That same night, someone successfully withdrew $400 from his account, from an ATM with no camera. Police immediately froze the account. The next attempt resulted in the ATM confiscating the card. It was dusted for fingerprints. Nothing. Investigators briefly considered that Matt may have survived, struck on the head during a mugging, wandering the streets of Los Angeles with amnesia. That hope grew stronger when Teresa and Steve visited a local rescue mission. Staff and regulars claimed someone resembling Matt had been coming in for meals. For weeks, his family believed he was alive. Then, 3 weeks later, Teresa's red VW was found, abandoned disturbingly close to the ATM where Matt had last been seen. The car had been wiped clean, no fingerprints, no trace, except one thing: a blue bandana on the back seat. Printed on it were the letters ESPBSCLS. Police suspected it referenced the East Side Playboys, a local gang. But there was no proof, no witnesses. The case went cold. 3 months after Matt vanished, hikers discovered his body in a dry ravine in Pasadena. He had been shot in the head. The autopsy revealed he'd died within days of disappearing. The sightings at the mission had been wrong. For 30 years, the case remained unsolved. Then in 2018, LAPD announced a shocking development. They had identified Matt's killer, David Bear Mesa, a 20-year-old gang member from Rampart. His former girlfriend identified him as the man in the ATM footage. The case was officially closed. But there was a problem. Mesa had been killed in a drive-by shooting just 2 days after Matt vanished, meaning he didn't act alone. Someone else dumped the car weeks later. Someone else stayed silent. Matt's loved ones finally had a name, but not the full truth. A young man trying to cash a paycheck never made it home. And without the relentless determination of his friends, his story may have disappeared forever. Carol and James Reggie Sumner were 61 years old, quiet, generous, and deeply trusting. Both were in poor health, Reggie diabetic, Carol recovering from cancer. Seeking peace, they left South Carolina behind and settled in Jacksonville, Florida, hoping to enjoy what time they had left. Instead, their kindness would seal their fate. In the summer of 2005, they welcomed a familiar face. Tiffany Cole, the daughter of a former neighbor. Years earlier, she'd bought a car from them and occasionally visited to make payments. That June, Tiffany arrived with her boyfriend, Michael Jackson. The Sumners offered them a bed for the night. Hospitality would become a death sentence. When Michael learned the couple had recently sold their home for nearly $100,000, his view of them changed. They weren't hosts, they were targets. Over the following weeks, Tiffany and Michael plotted. They recruited 2 teenagers, Alan Wade and Bruce Nixon, to do the dirty work. On July 8th, Alan and Bruce knocked on the Sumners' door, pretending to be lost kids needing a phone. The door opened. Minutes later, Reggie and Carol were bound and gagged. They were forced into the trunk of their own car, driven across state lines to a grave already waiting. In the woods of southern Georgia, they were dragged from the trunk, forced to give up their bank, PINs, and thrown into a hole. Michael screamed when he saw the tape over Carol's eyes slipping. He didn't want them to see him. They were buried alive. Their killers returned to the house, drained their accounts, celebrated with champagne. They even called police, pretending to be the Sumners. The voices fooled no one. Within days, all four were arrested. Reggie and Carol were found clinging to each other beneath the dirt. They had suffocated. Justice came, but only after unimaginable suffering. William and Barbara Singer lived quietly in Phoenix, Arizona, retired, gentle, in love. On June 28, 2014, security cameras captured them withdrawing money from an ATM late at night. Something felt wrong. William looked terrified. 4 days later, police found them murdered in their home. No forced entry, no answers, only fear. The case remains unsolved. In September 1998, Kayo Matsuzawa arrived in Auckland, New Zealand. She was cheerful, trusting, alone. Within hours, she vanished. Days later, her belongings were found in a trash bin. Weeks later, her body was discovered in a locked utility cupboard. Hidden in plain sight. Her killer was careful, confident, still free. On the morning of October 16, 2006, a maintenance worker unlocked the door to apartment 3B at the Sandpiper Apartments in Fort Myers, Florida. The tenant hadn't paid rent. Neighbors hadn't seen her in weeks, and something about the silence behind that door felt wrong. The moment the door opened, the smell hit him. Sweet, metallic, rotten. Inside the apartment, nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. The furniture was neat, the television sat untouched. A cup of coffee rested on the kitchen counter, mold blooming across its surface like a dark flower. Then he noticed the bedroom door. It was closed. When he pushed it open, he stepped into a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sarah Linton, age 27, lay on her bed. She had been there for weeks. Sarah was a medical receptionist, quiet, reliable, the kind of person who smiled politely but rarely drew attention. She lived alone, had recently ended a long-term relationship, and had been trying to rebuild her life piece by piece. Friends later said she'd been on edge in the weeks before she died. She told co-workers that someone had been watching her, that her phone would ring, and when she answered, no one spoke. That footsteps echoed outside her door late at night. Everyone told her the same thing. You're imagining it. The night Sarah died, October 2nd, surveillance cameras captured her returning home at 9:41 p.m. She was alone, or at least she thought she was. Investigators later discovered that the lock on the complex's back stairwell, a door rarely used and poorly lit, had been broken for months. Anyone could slip inside unnoticed, and someone had. The medical examiner determined Sarah had been stabbed multiple times, but what terrified detectives wasn't how she died. It was how long the killer stayed. Dirty dishes in the sink suggested someone cooked after the murder. The shower had been used. A fresh trash bag sat neatly tied by the door. Someone had cleaned up. Someone had lived there. Detectives found no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, which meant Sarah had either let her killer inside or never realized he was already there. Neighbors began coming forward. One woman reported hearing footsteps above her apartment at night, even after Sarah had supposedly moved out. Another tenant claimed he'd seen a man standing on Sarah's balcony at 3 a.m., smoking, staring down into the parking lot. But when police asked for a description, all he could say was, "I thought he lived there." Sarah's phone records revealed something chilling. Her phone had continued sending text messages days after her estimated time of death. Short replies, casual, normal. Messages to her mother, to a co-worker, to her ex-boyfriend. I'm fine. Busy at work. Talk later. None of them were written by Sarah. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed a man using Sarah's debit card 4 days after she died. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, but what froze investigators was the timestamp, 2:17 a.m. The same hour, neighbors reported hearing movement in her apartment. Police believed the killer had been someone Sarah knew, someone who had access to her phone, her apartment, her routines, but no fingerprints matched, no DNA hit, no suspect emerged. The case stalled. Then, 3 months later, another woman in the same complex reported something disturbing. She woke up to find her bedroom door open and muddy footprints leading from her window to her closet. Inside, police found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a notebook. Inside the notebook was a list of apartment numbers. Sarah's was circled. DNA from the sleeping bag finally led investigators to Mark Ellison, a 34-year-old former contractor who had worked renovations at the Sandpiper Apartments years earlier. He knew the building, the blind spots, the broken doors. When arrested, Mark showed no emotion. He confessed calmly. He said he'd been living in Sarah's apartment for 9 days after killing her, sleeping in her bed, wearing her clothes, answering her phone. He said it made him feel less alone. At trial, prosecutors revealed one final detail. On the night Sarah returned home, the night she died, Mark had already been inside her apartment, hiding, waiting, listening to her unlock the door. The horrors in these stories isn't found in how they end. It's hidden in how easily they begin. A routine night, a familiar place. Somewhere, a single decision was made, and someone else never made it home. Some of these cases were solved, others remain open, and a few may only be solved if the right person finally speaks. If these stories unsettled you, if they stayed with you longer than you expected, that means you were listening closely. Because evil doesn't always hide in the dark. Sometimes, it waits until you feel safe enough to look away. Good night, and I'll see you again very soon.